Baby boomers, what issues existed when you were young that made you think your elders were idiots? Asked my grandma, and she said the protection of children at the time. Both my great-grandma's parents died and left their 9 kids with just a 14-year-old, my great-grandma, to look after them. No support from the government until she accidentally killed her 5-year-old sister while cutting vegetables and turning around too quickly with a knife. Court ruled her for manslaughter, and since she was the only caretaker, she was allowed to stay home and some of the kids were taken. They didn't intervene until a child died. My grandma rants about this a lot when I complain about my siblings. At least I haven't been stabbed yet. She accidentally killed her 5-year-old sister while cutting vegetables. Dude, what the F? My stepfather, would be about 70 now, accidentally shot his younger brother in the face with a rifle when they were around 10 years old. Crazy shit used to happen to kids, man. One of my parents is one of the youngest boomers, technically the last year or so of being considered a boomer, born in the early 60s, and something that they always thought was so dumb was how about half of their generation would spend money to maximum out the limit of their credit. They would always talk about how people they knew would spend as much money as possible on as many things as possible as soon as they had the credit available for it. Spending the maximum amount you get pre-approved for a house. Spending the maximum amount you have available on credit cards, and when those are full, opening new credit cards, and not on necessities, but on frivolous things. I think when people say boomers ruined the economy, what that really means is like half of the boomers ruined the economy, while the other half sat there screaming. Dude, it's crazy how often my parents talked about people they knew doing that. I don't know a single person within 10 years of my age who would dare maximum out a credit card. Apparently in the 80s people thought credit cards were free money. Maybe it's akin to our generation oversharing in the early days of social media. Just people going too far with an unfamiliar technology. Speaking for my late father, who was a great funny guy for an old sergeant in the army, he always told me that his parents were pretty demanding. He lived with them until he was 19, and the last 5 years of that time was him working/hunting to fill their fridge full of food, while dad's dad worked as a volunteer firefighter. They basically made him think that, because they birthed him, he pretty much owed them a debt for life. The debt for life is something that just grinds my gears. Like, yeah, maybe you birthed me and raised me, but I didn't ask you to do that. Raising a kid you chose to have isn't a favor, it's a responsibility, and it's time to stop holding that over kids' heads. Vietnam, of course. Having teen and early 20s classmates go to war and I for reasons that still aren't clear to me today. The draft, no volunteer army like now, and only rich fucks with bone spurs could buy their way out of it. Pollution. Rivers that literally burned because they were so full of toxic chemicals. Smog that blanketed cities and could be seen for hundreds of miles. Pesticides everywhere. Smoking everywhere. Enclosed cars. Thanks mom and dad. In airplanes. Even in hospitals. Even the doctors and nurses. The EPA was started in 1970 to deal with some of these issues, now gutted by Trump. The threat of nuclear war. I remember in my college days paying close attention to the doomsday clock. I really believed we would be nuked into oblivion in my lifetime. The ridiculous hypocrisy of weed being illegal but alcohol, Valium popping moms, and cigarettes being legal. Boys/young men being spat on, yelled at, not being hired if they had long hair, which meant below the collar. Seriously, likewise, as a girl having to wear nylons and closed-toed shoes to school. Job ads in the newspaper that were separated by gender. The women's job section were limited to secretary, teacher, nurse, childcare, maybe bank tellers. And it was simply expected that, if you were good looking and female, you had to put up with sexist comments and groping in the workplace. In my first job, I was told that of course the men made more money, they had families to support. If you were a boy who wanted a non-traditionally manned job, you were automatically a sissy. Absent fathers. Fathers as a rule did not parent. I know this is a generalization, but it was true for everyone I personally knew. Corporal punishment, hitting, spanking, was totally acceptable. Even teachers could spank a kid and no one would say a thing. 67 years old woman here, right in the middle of the boomers. As a lot of people have said, Vietnam was insane, but our parents didn't seem to get what bothered us. They thought of war as WWII, something you did B/C. It was right. We saw politicians lying to us. It wasn't like Iraq either, where at least people who went had volunteered. And on TV every night, they'd do body counts. How many of us died? How many of them died? This was when I was in high school, and all 3 of my older brothers were in the military, 2 of them in the war zone. Aside from that, effing television shows were almost uniformly stupid. Sitcoms, JFC. So bad. You are so right. Before Vietnam, before Watergate, Americans trusted the government. Of course there were scandals from the beginning of America, but until that era, most people trusted the government. Now, in the era of stupid Watergate, I wonder if we ever will again. The big issue was Vietnam. There was a draft, and 18-year-olds were sent into this meat grinder of a war that we shouldn't have been in and nobody believed in. I mean, not even LBJ, the president at the time, believed we should have been there. Nobody wanted to pull out, and nobody wanted to do what was necessary to win. So kids were just being slaughtered. And it was pretty terrible for the Vietnamese too, of course. But there was so much more. Music. My parents' generation didn't get rock and roll at all. I remember my father predicting that the Beatles would be forgotten in 6 weeks, following their appearance on the Ed Sullivan Show. Sexuality, free love was a thing among those dirty hippie freaks. Completely alien to the morality of the day, which was to stay a virgin until married. For girls, guys were expected to F anything that moved. It's a bit disconcerting for me to see that boomers have become the idiots in so many ways. Seatbelts. In particular the fight against them. As a 10-year-old they seemed perfectly logical, yet lots of the grown-ups were opposed to their introduction. Credit cards. My parents' understanding was that any debt was a bad thing. It was so ingrained that I still hold this value. My brainwashing means that, though my bank offers free banking, if I use my card, I still draw cash out from the ATM. To buy my first house, I simply saved and paid in full and in cash. Same with all purchases. I'm torn on your second point. Used responsibly, credit cards are a great thing, but that responsibly is a big caveat. They are given out way too easily and people aren't taught nearly enough about how they work, how interest works, and how to actually be responsible with them. It took me many years to pay off credit cards thrust at me when I was young and stupid. More to repair my credit rating. I lean more towards your parents' view now, even though I still occasionally use the things responsibly. Double standards. I had brothers and a sister, and when we were kids the boys played out whilst us girls did the housework, etc. I'm talking cleaning windows with water and vinegar, and a chamois leather and scrunched up newspaper, followed by ironing everything for a 10-person household. We started this at around 8 years old. Edit. They were weekly tasks in a 5-bedroomed house, with 5 downstairs rooms, plus bathrooms and utility. We also had to the daily washing up, part of the cooking, serving up the meals, brewing the tea, all of the vacuuming, downstairs daily, upstairs weekly. My sister did the laundry twice a week in a twin tub washer and a mangle. She also had to get up before everyone else to set the fire in the grate. I had to change all of the bedding once per week. We had to iron the sheets and underwear. Got the memories. And there's tons of stuff I forgot. Also, girls don't ride bikes, so the boys got all the cool presents, and we got dolls, or a board game, or a play kitchen between us. Or, which was even more insulting, somehow, a sodding packet of bath cube things that smelled of processed chemicals, but was labeled patchouli. My brothers got a transistor radio and a Casio watch each. My sister got a pair of American tan tights, size XL. She was a skinny waif. I'm all for sharing housework amongst kids and parents. I totally am. But it has to be shared regardless of gender, because that only reinforces stereotypes. I've only got sons, who are now adults, obvs, and they all know how to keep the house. Back in the day, every household was like this, or so it seemed. I had to fight to get my partners to muck in and do their bit. The Vietnam War. Watergate. The gas crunch and economic downturn of the 70s. Mutually assured destruction. The ozone hole above Antarctica. Smog alerts. DDT. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe.